Right now, in Bolivia, there is a coup taking place. This is heartbreaking to me, and I don't quite understand why, but for whatever reason, I have an affinity for this, or I feel an attachment to this. I am immensely bothered by this, and I think part of the reason is I have a pet peeve when good people go through bad situations, and when something that is just outright disastrous and unfair by any legal standard and any legal precedent. Evo Morales is president of Bolivia. He has won that election fair and square. And despite him winning that election, the military, with right-wing elements, essentially outright fascists, being backed by us, and the actions that we took in Venezuela, essentially giving it a pass and allowing such to take place, has overthrown that government. Welcome to the soapbox.
This is a military coup. There's no doubt about
My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. If you guys dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon, even $1 helps. All of this content gets demonetized. It is brought to you by you. A coup takes place in Bolivia. Real terms. For those who say, well, if Clinton was in office, well, when Clinton was in office, Clinton allowed something similar to take place in Honduras, but this one is just that much more onerous. OAS, Organization for American States, comes out and says that the election that took place in Bolivia was dodgy in some way. They gave no evidence for this. And just as a point of a flat fact, it was not dodgy. That didn't stop Western media for essentially running with this. Is Donald Trump defending the oil in Syria, or is he stealing the oil in Syria? Propaganda, for whatever reason, works, especially if you just keep repeating something over and over and over again, and the people who you're repeating it to have nothing else to compare it to because they don't entirely pay attention to media. Listen to this. This is Michael Westbrook. He's on, not Michael Westbrook, I'm sorry. Mark Westbrook. He's with this organization, Center for Economic and Policy Research. No evidence that Bolivia election results were affected by irregularities or fraud, statistical analysis shows. Meaning when you look at the actual evidence, Evo Morales won in the first round. The right wing just did not want him to serve another term. And he took the opportunity with the Trump administration in office that has already shown, based on what took place in Venezuela, that if a right-wing opposition just doesn't concede, that they would get no pushback, and not just not get pushback, would even get support for doing so, especially against a left-wing government that they don't particularly like. Democracy Now!, Mark Westbrook.
There's no doubt about it now after the head of the military told the president and vice president to resign, and then they did. And I think it's really terrible the way it's been presented, because from the beginning you had that OAS press release the day after the election, which hinted or implied actually very strongly that there was something wrong with the vote count. And they never presented any evidence at all. They didn't present it in that release. They didn't present it in their next release. They didn't present it in their preliminary report. And there's really nothing in this latest so-called preliminary audit that shows that there was any fraud in this election. But it was repeated over and over again in all the media. And so it became kind of true. And, you know, if you look at the media, you don't see anybody, you don't see any experts, for example, saying that there was something wrong with the vote count. It's really just that OAS observation mission, which was under a lot of pressure, of course, from Senator Rubio and the Trump administration to do this, because they've wanted for some time to get rid of this government.
Yes, that's true. It also must be understood that OAS is a tool of the United States. It is not a thing unto itself. It's not something that pushes for this notion of fair elections and everything else. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which takes over many of the operations that the CIA was involved in, meaning the money that they put into various opposition parties for groups that they don't particularly like or in countries that they want to overturn. But the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which is ostensibly aid organization that serves as soft power arm of the U.S. government, wrote very clearly in its 2018 congressional budget justification that the OAS promotes U.S. political and economic interests in Western Hemisphere by countering the influence of anti-U.S. countries like Venezuela, but also like Bolivia. It's a leftist government. The media keeps dancing around this notion of a coup. That is literally what it is. The military asked him to step down, meaning when the military, instead of them defending the country itself that they were supposed to defend, which initially they said they were, asked the president to step down. The president gives a noble lie, which is, I'm stepping down in order to prevent violence. It didn't prevent violence at all. In fact, his house was raided. His sister's house was raided and ransacked. His ministers' areas had been set on fire and burned down. This woman, a mayor, dragged through the streets with her hair cut and doused in paint. These are the people that are taking power, and these are the tactics that they were using to take power. Violent extremists, fascists, running through the streets with the cops, not stopping them. This is what fascism looks like. And this is what fascism backed by the U.S. looks like. Evo Morales, executors assaulted my home and that of my sister, set fire to homes, threatened ministers and their children with deaths, and attacked the mayor, now lie and blame us for chaos. And again, Western media and the lemmings and bots repeat this nonsense. Mexico comes out and slams the coup because Mexico says it outright. Mexico condemns coup in Bolivia, slams OAS over inaction. What the Mexican government knows is that the guy who's in Mexico now is supposedly also a leftist. He could be subjected to the exact same thing if an election comes up. And he has to know that. He has to know that. An organization says something was wrong with the vote tally. The right wing just doesn't accept it and goes on a terror campaign. The United States backs that terror campaign, maybe even giving money to various elements in that government in order to stand pat. This is playbook. This is standard playbook. This is what they were doing in Chile and Guatemala and all of these countries in South America for the last 50, 60 years. It's just now that everyone has a cell phone. And this guy, Evo Morales, the only thing he did wrong was win. The only thing he did wrong was win. How long has Angela Merkel been in power? How long has Angela Merkel been in power? She's been in power forever. Nobody takes issue with it. The Supreme Court of Bolivia agreed that there was no legal issue for him running for a fourth term. The right wing hated it because the right wing couldn't win an election. Meaning his only problem, his only issue was that he could win. That's it. They just couldn't beat him. During his time in Bolivia, it must be made clear, national poverty, extreme poverty, declined 37% in 2017 to 17.3% in 2014. He's raised millions out of poverty. Rural extreme poverty went from 63.9% to 36.1%. Urban unemployment fell from 8.5% to 2.3%. Not just that, even the GDP, it must be made clear. His issue and the things that he was doing, the thing that he pissed people off for, was because he succeeded in raising a lot of people that were in poverty out of poverty to the tune of millions, increasing the GDP of the country, if I'm not mistaken, from 9 billion to 36 billion. That number may not necessarily be entirely accurate, but the point is true. He has done a phenomenal job in cutting and eliminating poverty in that country. Not to mention put a satellite up. He succeeded. Indigenous president, the first indigenous president in a country that was essentially ruled by the rich. The only thing he did wrong was win. That was it. His life is being threatened here. Apparently, there is an illegal warrant seeking his arrest. Because just because you step down doesn't necessarily mean that the violence is going to stop. And up to this point, it hasn't stopped. Right-wing terror groups had raided television stations, had held people under threat, had threatened ministers, had threatened family members, burned down houses. There is a terror campaign right now going on in Bolivia, attacking lefties and leftist groups. We back this. Think Venezuela. Think Venezuela. If you were a right-wing extremist group and the president of your country is a lefty and he's raised millions out of poverty, he was going to win the next election. He did win the next election. And you know also that he was planning on this. And Trump also knows this. Or at the very least the right wing in the United States. Morales to industrialize lithium for battery exports. Through state-led investments, Bolivia is making large strides in industrializing the country's natural resources, namely lithium. This is crucial, especially for environmental circumstances where people are trying to get these environmental laws passed. Lithium, meaning the batteries, will be phenomenally important because those will be the things that we will be using and powering our future on. He knows this. He's trying to make Bolivia a better place, especially from the standpoint of industry. Any and all countries that care about their country should be doing stuff like this. During a news conference announcement Tuesday, Bolivian officials said that the state has reserves and capacity to produce up to 400,000 lithium batteries per year. The announcement signals a departure from the country's exportation of raw materials and industrialization for the industrial market. Instead of Bolivia selling the raw materials for places in other countries to produce batteries and sell those batteries for a marked up price, they're cutting out the middleman. We can do it ourselves. This is not something that Western countries want to hear. And whether it's this or whether it's oil, the same reasoning for these type of coups are the same. There are geopolitical interests that coincide with interests within the context of the country itself. In this case, whether the United States is dumping a ton of money into Bolivia, or whether it's spreading money around from the standpoint of military, these right-wing groups, it's less clear. What is clear, however, that the right wing in this country took this election as an opportunity to foment a coup, running a terror campaign. They knew that the U.S., based on how the United States behaved with Venezuela, meaning we are going to find our patsy in Venezuela, Juan Guaido, who is willing to sell that country out if he can take power in the selling that country out. We are going to back him whole hog. We're going to give him all the money and resources. We are going to support terrorists throughout that country to run a terror campaign. And we are going to pretend as if the election where the other guy won didn't happen, or that something was wrong with the election results. Western media is going to parrot it, and they're just going to run with it because they're not smart enough, nor do they engage in politics in an honest way from the standpoint of international politics, because they want to take an American perspective. Whether the right wing was backed by the U.S. or not was almost less relevant. They could look at Venezuela and see the U.S. reaction in Venezuela, know that the United States hates Morales, and all they had to do was, we're not accepting the election results. The OAS, which is a tool of U.S. foreign influence, the moment that the OAS came on and said there's something dodgy with the election results, off to the races. The terror campaigns, a cosign, for whatever reason, matter less. The attacking, the various news stations. I don't entirely believe that the right wing in this country was doing that entirely on their own. I do, in some part, believe that the U.S. was backing them in this case. Pompeo himself came out saying he backed what was taking place in Bolivia. Not to mention the fact that the OAS came out and made that statement without any evidence at all does lead me to believe that the U.S. was in some way involved in this process. This bothers me. This bothers me greatly. And Mexico coming out, good. But again, Mexico realizes that this could be him in the next election if there's a Trump or a Republican in office in the United States. I'm going to end this here because Ben Norden is supposed to come on the show. He's supposed to be coming on essentially now. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in like 2 or 3 minutes. Thanks all.